Hello, my friends. I'm your host, Souza, and welcome to Women in Crypto. And today we have Monica Summerville with us. And Monica is a seasoned capital markets financial services executive and industry analyst. And she helps clients understand the new emerging technologies and industry trends that we have out there right now. So please welcome Monica. How are you doing today?
Hello, everyone. Good. Thank you, Laurie. Nice to see you, and welcome everyone.
Yeah, welcome and congratulations for being on the top 100 list for women in crypto.
It's very exciting. Thank you.
It is exciting times. You're doing a lot of good work. So
I hope so.
So tell us, what kind of emerging technologies are you working with your clients on in capital markets?
Yes, well, I do focus in the capital market space, so wholesale financial services, so investment banking, trading and sales, sort of those kind of activities. And I do cover a range of emerging technologies in these areas. And that includes things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, use of cloud technologies, which is actually quite established now and been very helpful in this crisis. Blockchain, of course, adoption of crypto, and that includes things like security, digitalization, and then even some of the more far out there technologies like quantum computing, which people are starting to use as well.
Wow. Now, what kind of business would use quantum computing?
Well, things like portfolio optimization is good for quantum computing. It's sort of good for certain types of problems, and optimization is one of them. So a lot of risk calculations is another one. So there are pockets of useful use cases, and that's, I think, one thing about my industry is they're very, very focused on the business use case for any technology. So although they want to keep up to date with technology, is not often a case of technology for technology's sake. They're always looking at that business angle.
Wow. So you are busy. And how did you come to be interested in all the emerging technologies?
Well, I started as an engineer. So that's what I studied at university. And when I was leaving university, it was right around the time that derivatives market was growing on Wall Street. I had been fortunate enough to intern on a government bond trading floor and loved it, much to my surprise. So I went from wanting to build bridges, physical bridges, to bridges between the technology and the business end of capital markets. And I've had my whole career in capital markets, pretty much in front office, in a variety of positions. I've been on the buy side, sell side, and with various consultants and that kind of thing. And always very much interested in how you can push the envelope when it came to using technology to help move the business forward. So very interested in understanding the business models and workflows. I was a licensed broker in the States for a while. Again, just really wanting to understand that business side of it, but with the idea of how we incorporate technology to improve things. And it's been great. So it's given me a chance to focus on lots of new technologies and learning something all the time. With crypto, actually, I was working for a company that was active in the high frequency trading space. So they made low latency network monitoring equipment, and those guys were super techies, and they were just interested in crypto when it first started coming out. So one of them actually started mining crypto, and I think we all just start looking at it out of curiosity. I wished I'd done more mining at the time. He's now retired and living somewhere very comfortable. But I always just thought it was a very interesting technology and had a lot of applications in our space. And, years later, when I was at Tab Group, officially covering fintech for capital markets, always keeping my ear to the ground, I started noticing that a number of very experienced people in the industry were moving over to crypto startups. And there were more and more use cases for blockchain, and I started seeing more applications and people taking crypto seriously. So we started covering it as a research area. And I think we were one of the earliest sort of serious research companies to look at the institutional adoption of crypto, because at that point it was very much regarded as a retail phenomenon and associated with the more negative aspects of crypto you hear, and people didn't believe that any institution would take it seriously. But very quickly that changed, And we managed to get a few research publications out and did a few conferences in the space. So that's how I just started building up that network and my, expertise in the area.
Yeah. Well, great. And so do you find that institutions now are adopting the digital currencies or looking at moving over to that technology for money?
Yeah, I think they're looking at it from the technology point of view, because you have blockchain as the underlying set of technologies that support crypto, but can support other interesting use cases for financial markets. And we're seeing, we already have real life cases of blockchain use in sort of the periphery of capital markets, and especially around trade finance. In the derivative space, that's a big area. So I think as people got more comfortable with the underlying technology and started realizing that it's not a case of crypto or blockchain, it's that if you're going to support digital currencies or digital assets, you're going to need to support that underlying technology and understand how it works. And at the same time, they're starting to understand a lot of the benefits and efficiencies it brings. So I would say that because there was that huge hype curve around blockchain and things didn't move as quickly as possible, as everyone thought, people are reluctant now to go public with what they're doing around blockchain and crypto, because they're just going to be laughed at pretty much, because everyone's saying, yeah, what's happening? Nothing's happening. But there is actually quite a bit happening behind the scenes right now. And really every major institution is looking at this seriously, or, has projects in place.
Absolutely. Well, good. And so what do you see the use case for blockchain technology in the financial services world besides currency?
Besides currency, yeah, I mean, like I said, there are lots of uses. We're seeing things in trade finance, and as I said earlier, the derivative space is a good one. So anything that, good areas are where it's more on the lower volume of transactions, but highly manual processes. And typically in the financial markets, you have lots of players that need to come together. So the industry in the past has tried to build utilities to service some of these types of, with new issuances. That's a big area where there's a lot of people coming together and having to communicate details and come to agreements and transfer monies, data. So anywhere you have people coming together like that, it's a good place to start looking at, is this a good solution for blockchain? Because this idea that you can have this decentralized system that doesn't require as much trust, of course, you still need to have the trust element in there to some degree, and there's still privacy, and a lot of the blockchain solutions support that as well. So there are ways around adapting blockchain to this market that I'm seeing, absolutely.
Yeah, it's more geared towards the transaction and the people involved in the transaction than the paperwork. And
yeah,
that's good. And so do you see, besides the resistance of, wow, do we keep it quiet that we're working on blockchain? Do you see any other resistance that institutions are having utilizing
the blockchain technology? I think it is still very difficult. There's this perception that you have to be a blockchain engineer, and it's quite esoteric technology, and it's very new to the industry. So it's a completely new skill set to learn. So part of the research that I've done is looking at how we can take that concept and change it to something that, blockchain is really more of the plumbing of the financial services. It should be back to that kind of status. So there are companies that offer blockchain as a service type offerings, where they help build the network for you, they help maintain the network, they help service the network, and then you can just put your business use case and your business logic and build that, on top of things. So we're seeing different movements like that in the space as well, and solution providers that are trying to help, that are focused on capital markets and trying to help in that way.
Wow. So the plumbing of the process, that can take a while. It's like a replumbing. Or
It is going to be a bit of a replumbing. I think the best solutions, there's a big conversation right now going on with interoperability, and it's not just interoperability between the different blockchain protocols that are out there, which is one way of looking at it, but it's interoperability between different transaction networks. And that doesn't mean that everything has to day one speak to each other, or you don't have to be using the same protocol, but there should be ways of moving data and transactions from one network to another in a way that, in financial transactions, quite often you have assets, and those assets need to be encumbered for something. They're dedicated as collateral, or they're being pledged for something, and that asset has to stay encumbered. Those sort of things have to transfer as you transfer through the different networks. So this interoperability, I know, is something that a number of solution providers are also looking at. And I think also the market participants need to understand there's a technical aspect between the protocols of blockchain, but there's also just your old school, we could do it with APIs, or we can do it other ways of joining the different transaction networks. And that's an important piece of the puzzle to be solved for capital markets as well.
Yeah, is when to use what technology. And you mentioned cloud as well. So you're seeing an increase in cloud?
Oh, absolutely. And it's I like to point people to the history of cloud use in my industry, because I released a report in sort of early 2016 where I talked to a lot of the heads of production management at companies, operational heads, and business side. And they, publicly, all the big banks were saying, we're not going to touch cloud. It's it's a reputational risk. There was still concerns about security and data privacy, all these issues. Went ahead with my report that basically said we're at a tipping point, because speaking to people behind the scenes, I realized a lot of people were doing things with the cloud. And then by the end of that year, some big banks, HSBC and Goldman Sachs, they all came out saying we're doing stuff with cloud, we're moving our infrastructure. And then within 6 months of a year, everyone had to be on cloud or have a cloud strategy. And I think something similar is sort of poised to happen with blockchain, where a lot of people right now publicly are expressing reservations, quite rightly. There's questions and issues about security, privacy, similar type of things. But if you look at where cloud has gone now, I mean, no one would think that there's a problem using cloud. And there still are regulatory issues to be worked out. There's here in Europe, there's a big consultation going on to look at how you move things into cloud and where the responsibilities lay. So there are still things to be ironed out, but no one questions the use of cloud as an important part of your technology strategy. And really, with the pandemic, we would not have got through it if we didn't have cloud.
Right.
The only way that we can transfer trading to home working is because of the cloud. So everyone is much, much more positive on that, because they've seen that real use case. And it was easier than people thought to move to home working. And it's because the technology was there, but they hadn't really stopped. They hadn't been forced to stop and use it and apply it. And I think a lot of the building blocks for blockchain is there as well, and for crypto and for digital securities. And hopefully the fact that it's gone so well in the pandemic and sort of moving over to the cloud technologies, I mean, obviously it's a terrible time, so I'm not trying to say it's a good time for anyone, but it has been good for the technology, because people now are more comfortable in trying new things and seeing that can work. So I'm sort of hopeful the same thing's going to happen with the digital assets side.
Absolutely, with blockchain. And so the technology exists. Now everybody's using it. People are working from home. And so with cloud being centralized and blockchain being decentralized, do you see that there's any resistance in decentralizing information with the companies you're working with?
There is lots of concerns and lots of resistance. I mean, obviously anyone who benefits from either because they earn revenue off that centralization, or that's their business model. So there's the way our industry and capital markets is set up is very centralized. And if you look at a lot of the crypto exchanges when they started, a lot of the crypto exchanges have done very well. They're centralized as well. So there are reasons why centralization is a good thing and it works. but that does seem to be the default position in the market. So there is a natural resistance to when you start talking about decentralization. It threatens the current business models, it threatens current revenues, but it's also an opportunity for new entrants to get in there. And I think even a few of these parties, solution providers that do right now provide centralized services, they realize that they need to understand what's happening with this and have put a lot of effort into understanding the technology, starting to offer services. You know, you have a few traditional exchanges looking at offering digital exchanges. So I think a lot of them understand that this change is coming, and now it's a matter of understanding how they manage that process, where if they have clients that want to make use of this new technology, how they can offer services to that without, you know, ruining their existing or their older business model. So it's really understanding the migration and transition of the business models at this point. But I don't think anyone really doubts that that change is going to take place.
Yeah, and it's taking place, and
yes,
it's moving behind the scenes, as you said. So about AI, then, where does AI come all into capital markets? What are you saying that?
Well, AI, AI has been around as a technology for a very long time, and the big change in the last few years was cloud was an important part, and now we have access to inexpensive compute resources that can crunch the numbers enough to support the AI. The other big piece of the puzzle with AI is data, however. And, our industry produces a lot of data, has a lot of data, but managing that data and organizing it in a way that can be useful for AI is very, very difficult. So, realistically, the use of AI in capital markets is talked about a lot, but the hardcore uses are still in areas like modeling, doing models for investment models. And there's a lot of work on what I would call intelligent robotic process automation. So maybe not full-blown AI. And then we have things in the customer, understanding the customer space. So really, really, especially as the margins are getting squeezed, you have to know who your best customers are and who they aren't and what they need, and make sure you're servicing them well. So people are using AI in those areas as well. But again, a lot of these technologies are very intertwined, because you need to use cloud and other things to make the most use of it. And I'll be interested to see how AI and blockchain and smart contracts, how all those things start intersecting, because obviously blockchain will be another source of big data for the industry, and smart contracts is an interesting area as well.
Oh yeah,
we're going to start running things robotically.
Yeah, well, and it definitely does bring the decision making to the machines. When we're talking about AI and financial decision making on when to sell and when to buy.
Yeah, I don't think there's so much use of that right now. It's when I say modeling portfolios, it's looking for trends, and it's suggesting a route to go. But right now it's very much a combination of man and machine, person and machine, woman and machine. It's the decision to buy or sell is not wholly in the hands of the machine. What it is the timing of those decisions. So we see, algorithmic trading and those kind of things. It's when certain conditions are tripped, orders go out, but that's more of a rules based, as opposed to they're not handing the reins completely over to AI, because there are obviously a lot of ethical issues, and there's bias issues, and there's regulatory issues with AI as well. So I don't think we're quite there yet.
No. And do you think that blockchain is going to help with that?
Blockchain will help with the ethical situation.
With the ethical portion.
I mean, the blockchain, one area that it could help with is on the data sourcing side, because there's lots of issues around ownership of data. Obviously, one big use case for blockchain is around identity and who owns, who's the sovereign, who owns that data, this data sovereignty issue.
Right.
And I, speaking to a lot of people in the capital market space and the investment side, they're a little wary of using certain alternate data sets because they don't know that those permissions have been given properly. So they don't want to use data that's been pulled out of systems that it shouldn't have been, and personal data and those kind of things. They're very wary of that. So there is an opportunity there for, if you could get blockchain working in on sort of certifying that this data is a clean data set, that would bring that comfort level up. And this industry really is looking for new data all the time. So that's an interesting area to look at.
Yeah, definitely a busy one too. So then the question I have is, why do you think blockchain is the future?
I think it just taps into a lot of the trends that are already there. So like I said, this industry has tried a number of times to build certain utility services, because there's a lot of commodity effort that goes into delivering on some of these capital market solutions. But in the past, the technologies just didn't support, utilities were just really expensive to build and run. Getting a way to have a whole group of people who are basically competitors working together and trusting each other was very, very difficult. So, clearly we hear the same words with blockchain, this whole thing about trustless, the decentralized nature of it. So distributed, all of those things really fit in with an industry that's looking, an industry that does have its margin squeeze, an industry that is under some stress, considering there's a financial crash and now this, changing regulatory mood about transparency. There's real push by the regulators to be as transparent as possible. So I just think blockchain has answers to a lot of those questions, and any company that's not having a conversation about it should really be wondering what they're doing.
Yeah. So it being a transaction of trust or a trustless transaction.
Right.
Depends on
exactly.
who you're talking to. So do you have any advice for our listeners, Monica?
Well, I think, listeners who are in the capital market space, I think should believe that this is a technology worth understanding and worth using. My advice to you is, if you don't have a team of people that are already proficient with blockchain, find solution providers that often offer these blockchain as a service type solutions. There are actually a number of companies out there focused in our space that can help with the engineering side of it, and really want to work with you on understanding your business and how your use case can be applied in blockchain. So they can lead you through the questions you should ask. Is this problem you're having really good for blockchain? And knowing these companies, I'll tell you, they will say this is not a blockchain solution, if it isn't. So don't worry about that. But I would just say, get out there and start understanding what you can do with the technology. So maybe not understand the technology, you don't have to be a blockchain engineer, right, but to really start understanding what the benefits it brings you, so that you can find those problems and challenges in your enterprise that can be solved with it.
Absolutely. And you do a lot with the workflow and business processes and how it can help.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's what I look at. I look at emerging technology and how it's impacting the workflows and ultimately the business models. In some cases, it's changing the business model slightly, and in some cases, there's just going to be replacement of business model. There's going to be a new business model that's coming up. So you have to try to look at it from both ends. And it's really only understanding the potential of the technology. I think that you can get to a point where you can see a potential new business model before your competitor does.
Yeah. Well, do you see that we're going to move towards a more decentralized, or stay in a centralized, or possibly a hybrid?
I think there's always going to be a need for some amount of centralized control, and that's because we have, the reality is we live in different countries and we have different currencies and we have governments to contend with. There's always going to be politics and all these issues. So there's always going to be a degree of centralization. But I do believe it's going to move more decentralized, where it can. It just makes sense, and that just takes a lot of the friction. Everyone wants to take friction out of these transactions. It's the only way that you can offer some of these solutions to a wider group of people. And as the whole world, the capital markets is about, ultimately, it's a good thing. It gets bad press, but it's a way of getting investment to people so that they can build new companies and they can fund new ideas. And people with great ideas don't just live in California. They live all over the world. They live in the emerging markets. You know, there's lots of incredibly clever people. So if we can find a way of making it easier to fund those ideas and get attention and expose those ideas to the world, you know, that's really ultimately a good thing. And I think people in capital markets would embrace that.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, you've given us a lot of good information and
Oh, I hope so. It's a great topic.
yeah, it really is. Well, we could keep going, but time just flies by so fast. And thank you so much for being here today, Monica. I really appreciate it. And congratulations for being one of the top women in crypto. And
Thanks, Laurie. No, it's brilliant.
All your work that you're doing is really great. And thanks for sharing that with all of our listeners. So.
Sure. And thanks for the series. I look forward to seeing the complete series.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you all for joining us today. And we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.